Okay, bonjour. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about Paris. The reason why we're going to talk about Paris is you're actually going to be doing a little project about one of the monuments in the city. So let's take a look. To start with, just a few facts about Paris. In the last census taken in 1999, Paris had a population of 2,125,246. Now, keep in mind, before we read the next fact, that the entire country of France is smaller than the state of Texas. It's about the same size, but it's a little bit smaller. So its population density means the number of people living within a certain amount of area. Okay, so this certain amount of area we give a unit of kilometers squared. So in Paris, within 1 kilometer squared, there are 21,196 people living. To give you some perspective, in Portland, the population density of Portland is 1,689.2 per kilometer squared. Okay, so it is very, very densely populated in France. A lot of people live in apartments, and they are living together. There's not a whole lot of space. Okay. Next fact, this city welcomes around 30 million tourists each year. So on top of that, 2 million people that are actually living in Paris, throughout the year there are 30 million tourists. And then to keep in mind also, the city is divided into 20 what are called arrondissements. And these are kind of the different neighborhoods of the city, but the lines between the neighborhoods are pretty well defined. So here we have a map of France, and what you see in the different colors here, these are the regions of France. Currently, France has 22 regions, and so if you look right here where it says Île-de-France, this is the region where Paris is, and you can see it's right there. Now, when I lived in France, I didn't actually live in Paris. I lived in a town called Poitiers, which is right here in the region of Poitou-Charentes. And so I would take a train to Paris, and it took about an hour and a half to 2 hours, the train between Paris and Poitiers. So right here, Ile-de-France, we're going to look at another map here shortly that zooms in on just a very small section of this region. So here's the city of Paris. This is just the city itself. This doesn't include the outlying areas, of which there are some. So for instance, the airport is in the outlying areas. There's Disneyland in the outlying areas, not in Paris proper. This is what we call Paris proper. And as I mentioned before, Paris is broken up into arrondissements. There are 20 of them, and you call them by their number. And so it kind of looks like a snail shell. You see how it starts with 1 here, and then it circles around, it gets bigger. See? Okay. There's a river that runs through Paris, and this river is called La Seine. La Seine is the name of the river. And so the different arrondissements are called by their number, and it kind of goes in a snail shape, as I said, and then the river that runs through it. Now, keeping in mind that the city of Paris is actually very small when it comes to the actual area of the town, but it's very, very densely populated. There are a lot of people needing to get around Paris, and they want to get around quickly, and as well as tourists. And so the French have an excellent subway system, and they call their subway system le métro. Le métro. This is a map of their subway system. So you can see all these different colored lines. These are the different train lines, okay? And you can see wherever these little white dots are, those are the stops. And then if you have larger white dots, that means that you can transfer to a different train. The train system in France is fantastic. The trains always run on time and they come just a few minutes apart, so you never have to wait very long. If you do miss your train, there's definitely going to be another one coming. This is all underground. There are a few trains that'll come up to the surface, but for the most part, all the metro trains are underground, and they're very easy to navigate actually. And so this map is posted. It's posted in the trains. It's posted in the walls down below. Very, very simple. There are also buses to get around. They run on time as best they can, but of course they're subject to the traffic and such. The great thing about the metro is that it doesn't run into traffic. Sometimes the train itself is crowded, but you don't have to deal with any traffic. So that's one plus. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the monuments of Paris, and I've divided these monuments into 3 sections. The first section is about museums. So first I'm going to show you some pictures of museums, and then followed by religious buildings. Religious buildings, there are a ton of them all throughout France. France historically has been a very Catholic country, although it's very secular now. It's not as religiously affiliated as it once was. And then lastly, just some other monuments. Okay, now as we go through these, you don't need to write down the name of every single one. However, you do need to think of 2 or 3 that you might like to do a little bit more research on, because you will be asked to research one of these monuments, and no one can pick the same one. So there may be some overlap, so you might want to have more than one chosen. Museums are up first. In French, it would be les musées. Museums. So Le Louvre, you may have heard before. It is definitely one of the most well-known museums in the world, and certainly one of the largest. The Louvre used to be the palace where the king and queen lived before Versailles was built. So it is huge. You cannot do the Louvre in one day. You can't even do it in 1 week. In order to see everything, it's said that you could spend a lifetime and not see everything that's in the Louvre, because it is just that large. Here is the Musée d'Orsay. Musée d'Orsay is known for its Impressionist art. The building itself used to actually be a train station, but for quite some time now it has been a museum. Impressionist art, you might know of Monet was an Impressionist. Van Gogh was a little bit later. He was a post-impressionist, but some very popular names when it comes to French art, and many of those paintings and works of art are housed in Le Musée d'Orsay. Le Centre Pompidou certainly has some interesting architecture. You may look at this picture and think, oh, well, it's under construction. It's actually not. This is the completed building. It is designed to look like it was built inside out. So you can see the staircase, a staircase and escalator on the outside of the building. And then this looks like scaffolding on the outside of the building. It's a very, very modern kind of architecture. Inside the Centre Pompidou, it is a museum, and it houses mostly more modern pieces of art. A lot of abstract things. For some people, they may look at the art pieces and go, really, that's art? But that's the kind of thing that you're going to find in the Centre Pompidou. It's more abstract, more modern art. Les Invalides. Might be an interesting choice if you are interested in war or armies. This is an army museum, and actually, Napoleon, his tomb is located within Les Invalides. So that might be interesting to some of you who are real war buffs. Next up are religious buildings. Here we have Le Panthéon, and you might not expect to see a building with this kind of architecture in Paris because it definitely looks more Greek or Roman, probably more Roman, I guess. But this was designed to be a church. What kind of brings some people to it is not only the architecture, but also Victor Hugo. Victor Hugo, you may know, you might recognize his name. He was the author of Les Miserables, that was made into a musical and then a movie most recently by with Anne Hathaway and Hugh Jackman. So Victor Hugo, he wrote Les Miserables. He's a very well-known author, and he is buried in Le Panthéon. La Cathédrale Notre-Dame, you have probably heard of before. If not, you may have seen pictures of it. It is a very, very large cathedral located in the very center of Paris, and its architecture is quite stunning. It's also much, much larger than you could even imagine, especially for it being a cathedral. So definitely an interesting one if you're interested in architecture. The Basilique Sacré-Cœur, often referred to as just Sacré-Cœur, is a basilica on top of the hill in Paris. There's a hill in Paris called Le Montmartre. Montmartre is the Mount of Martyrs, and although this may look very, very old, it's actually only about 100 years old. It was completed at the very beginning of the 20th century. So definitely not the oldest building in Paris, but it certainly is a stunning one, especially because it is perched on top of a hill. Next we have the Cimetière du Père-Lachaise. Père-Lachaise is a cemetery. It's an old cemetery, and so there are very many people. There are very, very, very many people buried there. But some are famous. Most well known to Americans is Jim Morrison, who was the lead singer of the band The Doors. He was a bit of a rock legend, really. Died young. You can ask your parents about him if you don't know the name. But many Americans flock to Le Cimetière du Père-Lachaise because they want to visit his grave. Also, Oscar Wilde is buried there, a very well-known playwright. La Sainte-Chapelle is known for its just amazing Gothic architecture. You can see these points. This is very, very reminiscent of Gothic architecture. It's a very excellent example of it. So it's just a beautiful place. People love to visit it. La Basilique Saint-Denis is well known because buried there are many, many, many French kings. In fact, nearly every French king from the 10th to the 18th centuries was buried there. So if you're interested in French history, it could be a very interesting place to visit. There used to be a larger tower here. You can see it looks a little off-center, but they deconstructed it. La Madeleine is another church, although it looks very much like an old Roman temple. That was the style of the time was Roman architecture. So you can see the relief here, how it's carved into the stone and the long pillars. So that's the La Madeleine. Next up are just some other monuments. Clearly the most well-known monument of France is La Tour Eiffel. In French they say La Tour Eiffel, not the Eiffel Tower. This was constructed for the World's Fair and was originally meant to be torn down, but it ended up staying just where it is and ended up becoming the symbol of France. Here we have l'Arc de Triomphe. This is a very large arch in the middle of a huge roundabout. You can see the cars driving around it. I think it has something like 12 spokes, 12 roads coming off of this. It's just huge. You can actually go up to the very top of this, and I personally think that it has the best view of the city, better than the Eiffel Tower. So that's l'Arc de Triomphe. It was commissioned by Napoleon. Here we have Le Palais Garnier, and this is Paris's opera house. It's very ornate, very beautiful. If you're at all interested in music, you might want to study Le Palais Garnier. Here we have La Conciergerie. It's a medieval building, originally part of the palace, and then used as a prison. La Sorbonne was actually one of the first European universities, very, very early university in Paris. It was just a small part of the university, but this is what people see now is this building here, referred to as La Sorbonne. L'Hôtel de Ville. L'Hôtel de Ville just means city hall. Every city in France has an Hôtel de Ville, but Paris's Hôtel de Ville is pretty impressive. It still uses City Hall today. The original construction was completed in 1357, and it's still being used today. So I think that's pretty cool. Lastly, we have Le Pont Neuf. Pont Neuf means the new bridge. Ironically, it is actually the oldest standing bridge in Paris. At the time when it was built, it was named the New Bridge because there were other bridges, but it is now the oldest standing bridge, and it is crossing La Seine, the river that I talked about at the beginning of the video. Okay, so I'm going to wish you bonne chance. I hope that you wrote down 2, if not 3 or more monuments that you might like to study, and we will talk about that more tomorrow.